Beneath, the ancient mystery of hidden worlds. In the quiet hours when shadows grow long and the world above settles into stillness, there exists a question that has whispered through human consciousness for millennia. What lies beneath our feet? Not the shallow soil where roots take hold, nor the familiar caves we've mapped and explored, but deeper still, in the vast, silent chambers that stretch beyond our reach. Every culture that has ever gazed upward at the stars has also wondered about the darkness below. From the sacred texts of ancient civilizations to the classified documents of modern expeditions, the same tantalizing possibility emerges. We may not be alone on this planet. Not visitors from distant stars, but neighbors dwelling in realms carved from stone and silence, hidden beneath the very ground we walk upon. Tonight, we descend together into this mystery. Through forgotten maps and whispered legends, past the boundaries of conventional wisdom, into territories where science meets mythology and facts blur with dreams. Let the weight of curiosity settle gently over you as we begin this journey downward, following threads of evidence and imagination that stretch back to humanity's earliest memories. The surface world fades now. Below us, in the darkness, something ancient stirs. Darkness has always been humanity's first teacher. Long before we learned to chart the stars or map the oceans, we discovered something far more intimate and mysterious. The hollow echo that rises when we call into caves. The cool breath that emerges from cracks in stone. The unsettling sense that beneath our feet lies not solid earth, but space. Vast, patient space that seems to listen. Every civilization that has ever flourished on this planet has carried within its collective memory the same haunting certainty. There is another world below. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. Chambers and corridors, and perhaps even kingdoms, that exist in the darkness beneath our daily lives. This is not coincidence. This is not the product of isolated imagination. This is a pattern so universal, so persistent across cultures and centuries, that it demands we ask not whether these stories are true, but why they feel so true. The ancient Greeks spoke of Hades with the intimate familiarity of neighbors describing a distant district. To them, it was not some abstract realm of punishment, but a structured underworld with rivers, palaces, and laws. The Mesopotamians whispered of Kur-Nugia, where shadows of the dead wandered endless halls carved from stone and silence. These were not the fevered dreams of primitive minds grasping for meaning in a chaotic world. These were detailed cosmologies, complete with geography, inhabitants, and rules of passage. The Egyptians described the Duat, a subterranean realm where the sun god Ra journeyed each night through 12 houses of darkness, battling serpents and demons to ensure dawn's return. Hindu traditions spoke of Patala, 7 magnificent realms beneath the earth, where serpent kings ruled cities of unimaginable splendor. Their palaces lit not by sun or fire, but by radiant jewels that had never known the touch of surface light. In the frozen north, Norse storytellers carved runes telling of Svartalfheim, the realm of dark elves who dwelt in caverns beneath mountains, masters of craft and keepers of secrets. Across the ocean, indigenous peoples of the Americas preserved oral traditions of the Ant people, tall, luminous-eyed beings who opened their underground cities to shelter humanity during times of fire and flood. The Hopi still tell these stories with reverence, not as mythology, but as history passed down through generations like precious stones. What strikes the modern mind as remarkable is not that these stories exist, but that they exist everywhere. Separated by oceans, mountains, and millennia, cultures that never encountered one another independently developed strikingly similar visions of what lay beneath. They spoke of glowing cities where time moved differently, of wise beings who possessed knowledge lost to the surface world, of passages that led downward through stone into realms of eternal twilight. The consistency is haunting. It suggests either a shared archetypal truth buried deep in human consciousness or something far more literal, a collective memory of encounters with worlds that truly exist below. Consider the precision of these accounts. The Greeks didn't simply imagine a place below. They described specific rivers, Styx, Lethe, Acheron, each with distinct properties and purposes. They named the ferryman Charon, detailed his payment in coins, mapped the geography of judgment and punishment with the careful attention of surveyors. The Tibetan Book of the Dead provides elaborate instructions for navigating the bardo, the intermediate state between life and death, complete with landmarks and beings one might encounter. These are not vague fantasies but detailed guidebooks, as if written by travelers who had actually made the journey and returned to tell others what they had seen. The persistence of these underground realms across human imagination suggests something more profound than coincidental storytelling. Perhaps these myths preserve fragments of actual encounters, memories of meeting peoples who had chosen different paths of survival, who had developed technologies and social structures adapted to life beneath the surface. Or perhaps they reflect humanity's intuitive understanding that the Earth itself is far more complex and inhabited than our surface-dwelling perspective allows us to perceive. What transforms mere curiosity into genuine wonder is the recognition that these stories were not created by primitive minds grasping for explanations, but by sophisticated cultures that possess their own forms of knowledge as observation and record-keeping. The Greeks who described the rivers of Hades had explored actual cave systems throughout the Mediterranean. The Mesopotamians who spoke of shadowy underworlds lived in regions honeycombed with natural caverns and artificial tunnels. The precision of their accounts suggests they may have been documenting something real, even if that reality was transformed through generations of retelling into the mythological frameworks we encounter today. As we prepare to delve deeper into this mystery, moving from the realm of ancient whispers into the age of maps and scientific speculation, we carry with us this fundamental question. What if the consistency of these stories across cultures points not to shared psychological archetypes, but to shared experiences of a world that exists parallel to our own? The answer may lie not in the myths themselves, but in the carefully drawn charts and calculated theories that would soon attempt to give these ancient intuitions a scientific foundation. But if ancient voices whispered of worlds below, it was the Renaissance that dared to draw them. In an age when cartographers filled the edges of their maps with sea monsters and the warning, "Here be dragons," something far stranger began to appear on the most carefully crafted charts of the world. At the very poles of the Earth, where ice and sky seemed to meet in an endless embrace of white, mapmakers sketched something that defied everything explorers thought they knew about the planet beneath their feet. Vast openings, like the mouths of impossible caves, leading downward into the heart of the world itself. These were not the casual sketches of dreamers or the wild imaginings of tavern storytellers. These were the work of Europe's most respected geographers, men who staked their reputations on accuracy and whose maps guided ships across treacherous seas to distant continents. Gerard Mercator, whose name still graces the projection used in classrooms today, depicted the North Pole not as solid ice, but as a whirlpool of converging rivers drawing the ocean downward toward a central landmass. At its heart rose a black mountain, Rupes Nigra, like a dark pillar marking the axis of the world. The detail was meticulous, the artistry breathtaking, and the implications staggering. Where did such images come from? Mercator claimed to draw from ancient sources, manuscripts and charts passed down through generations of explorers and scholars. Some historians suggest he was influenced by Norse legends of Hyperborea, the mystical land beyond the north wind. Others believe he had access to records from even earlier seafarers, Phoenicians, Vikings, or explorers whose names have been lost to time, but whose discoveries lived on in the careful strokes of medieval scribes. Whatever the source, these maps created ripples that would spread across centuries, seeding an idea that would captivate some of history's most brilliant minds. Among them was Edmund Halley, the astronomer whose name adorns the comet that visits our skies every 76 years. In 1692, Halley published a paper in the Royal Society's Philosophical Transactions that would forever link his reputation to one of the most audacious theories ever proposed by a respected scientist. The Earth, he suggested, was not the solid sphere that common sense demanded, but hollow, containing within its shell concentric spheres, each potentially capable of supporting life. perhaps even illuminated by some internal source of light that filtered through the polar openings described in those ancient maps. Halley's theory was not born of fantasy, but of careful observation. Compass reading showed puzzling variations that seemed to suggest the Earth's magnetic field was more complex than a simple solid sphere could explain. Perhaps, he reasoned, there were multiple magnetic sources within a hollow Earth, each contributing to the patterns navigators observed. The theory was elegant, mathematically plausible, and utterly revolutionary. It suggested that humanity might not be alone on this planet, but might share it with civilizations dwelling in chambers vast enough to contain their own skies. The idea took root in fertile soil. By the early 19th century, the notion of a hollow Earth had captured imaginations far beyond academic circles. Enter John Cleves Symmes, Jr., a former Army officer whose passion for the theory would consume his life and reshape how an entire generation thought about the world beneath their feet. Symmes didn't merely theorize, he campaigned. He distributed handbills across America declaring, "The Earth is hollow and habitable within," containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles, 12 or 16 degrees. This wasn't the rambling of a madman, but the calculated argument of a man who had studied every account of polar exploration, every anomalous compass reading, every report of unusual weather patterns or strange lights observed near the Arctic. Symmes petitioned Congress to fund an expedition to locate these polar openings, arguing that America could establish trade relations with the advanced civilizations dwelling within. His lectures drew crowds from coast to coast, and his followers, known as Symmesians, included congressmen, businessmen, and even fellow military officers who found his logic compelling. The maps that had once seemed like artistic license suddenly felt like navigation charts to undiscovered countries. If Mercator's whirlpool was real, if Halley's calculations were correct, if Symmes's passionate advocacy was grounded in truth, then the greatest discovery in human history lay waiting at the ends of the Earth, where ice gave way to openings large enough to swallow ships whole. The tragedy is that Symmes never saw his dream realized. Despite his tireless advocacy and the growing movement of believers, no government expedition was ever mounted to search for the polar openings he was certain existed. But his ideas had taken on a life of their own, spreading through literature, inspiring explorers and feeding the public's hunger for mystery in an age when the world seemed to be shrinking with each new discovery. Jules Verne would later channel this fascination into Journey to the Center of the Earth, giving literary form to what Symmes and his followers believed was scientific fact. Yet as the 19th century progressed and polar exploration advanced, no great openings were found. The ice revealed only more ice, and the romantic notion of gateways to inner worlds began to seem like the beautiful delusion it perhaps always was. Or was it? Those Renaissance maps remained, their intricate details still unexplained. Halley's magnetic anomalies persisted, and new discoveries about the Earth's structure only seemed to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Perhaps the mapmakers of old weren't documenting literal geography, but something far more profound: the persistent human intuition that the world contains more than what appears on its surface. As we stand at the threshold between the age of maps and the age of legend, between the documented and the dreamed, we find ourselves drawn not toward the poles where Symmes sought his answers, but toward the towering peaks of Asia, where ancient wisdom speaks of hidden kingdoms that make even the hollow Earth seem modest by comparison. High in the world's most forbidding mountains, where peaks pierce the sky like ancient spears and the air grows thin enough to touch eternity, there exists a legend so compelling that it has drawn seekers for over 1,000 years. Unlike the shadowy underworlds of Greek mythology or the ominous depths described in Western tales, this hidden realm promised not punishment or darkness, but illumination beyond anything the surface world had ever known. The Tibetans called it Shambhala, the source of happiness, the pure land, the kingdom where enlightened masters dwelt in palaces of gold, guarding wisdom that could transform not just individual souls, but the destiny of all humanity. The earliest Buddhist texts spoke of Shambhala with the precision of a travel guide written for the spiritually prepared. It was said to be encircled by snow-capped peaks that formed a natural fortress, accessible only through hidden passes known to those whose hearts had been purified by years of meditation and compassion. Within these barriers lay a realm of impossible beauty, cities whose spires caught light that seemed to emanate from the very stones, gardens where flowers bloomed in eternal spring, and libraries containing the accumulated wisdom of ages stretching back to when the world was young. This was not merely a paradise for the dead, but a living kingdom inhabited by beings who had transcended the limitations that bound ordinary mortals. The Kalachakra Tantra, one of the most sacred texts in Tibetan Buddhism, described it as the wellspring of a prophetic teaching that would emerge when the world above descended into chaos and darkness. According to these ancient sources, Shambhala was ruled by a succession of enlightened kings who possessed not only spiritual mastery, but also technologies that seemed to border on the miraculous. They could see across vast distances, communicate without words, and wielded forces that could heal or destroy depending on the wisdom and compassion of their application. Most remarkably, time itself moved differently within the kingdom's borders. A single day in Shambhala was said to encompass years in the outer world, allowing its inhabitants to observe the rise and fall of civilizations like flowers blooming and withering in an accelerated garden. For centuries, these teachings remained locked within monastery walls, shared only among initiates who had proven their readiness for such profound secrets. But as the 19th century brought Western explorers into the hidden valleys of Tibet and Nepal, whispers of Shambhala began to reach ears that had been trained to dismiss such tales as mere superstition. Yet something about these accounts proved irresistible to minds that had already been prepared by the hollow earth theories of Halley and Sims to believe that the world contained mysteries far greater than conventional geography suggested. The first serious Western expedition to seek Shambhala was led by a man whose very name seemed destined for legend, Nicholas Roerich, a Russian artist, philosopher, and explorer whose penetrating blue eyes and flowing white beard made him look like a figure stepped from one of his own mystical paintings. In the 1920s, Roerich journeyed deep into Central Asia, following ancient trade routes through mountain passes where the air was so thin that every breath became a conscious act of will. What Roerich found defied easy categorization. Local lamas spoke of the hidden kingdom with the matter-of-fact certainty that Westerners reserved for discussing neighboring countries. They pointed to distant valleys shrouded in perpetual mist and described seeing lights that danced above certain peaks on nights when the moon was dark. Some claimed to have encountered messengers from Shambhala, figures in flowing robes who appeared suddenly on mountain paths, delivered cryptic warnings or guidance, then vanished as mysteriously as they had come. Roerich's detailed journals describe moments when the very landscape seemed to shift before his eyes, revealing glimpses of structures that couldn't possibly exist at such altitudes. Terraced gardens cascading down impossible mountainsides, golden spires catching light from sources he couldn't identify, and always, just at the edge of perception, the sense of being observed by intelligences that regarded his expedition with benevolent but cautious interest. Meanwhile, in the drawing rooms and lecture halls of Europe and America, Helena Blavatsky was weaving these Eastern mysteries into a comprehensive mythology that would reshape how the Western world thought about hidden realms. Blavatsky, the enigmatic founder of Theosophy, claimed to be in direct communication with the Mahatmas, ascended masters who dwelt in various hidden sanctuaries around the world, including the legendary Shambhala. Through her voluminous writings, she began to connect the Buddhist kingdom of light with other underground realm traditions, suggesting that Shambhala was not merely a Tibetan legend, but part of a vast network of hidden civilizations. Most audaciously, Blavatsky proposed that Shambhala was connected to an even more mysterious realm called Agartha, a vast underground empire that she claimed stretched beneath entire continents. Linked by tunnels that had been carved in ages so remote that surface humanity had forgotten they ever existed. In her vision, Shambhala served as a kind of embassy or gateway between the surface world and this subterranean civilization, a place where the wisdom keepers of both realms could meet and coordinate their guidance of human evolution. The implications were staggering. If Blavatsky was correct, then the hollow Earth theorists had been thinking too small. The planet didn't merely contain empty spaces or even simple underground cities. It harbored an entire shadow civilization, complete with its own history, culture, and technologies that made surface achievement seem primitive by comparison. The masters of Shambhala weren't simply enlightened hermits meditating in mountain caves, but ambassadors from a world that existed parallel to our own, hidden not just by geography but by layers of secrecy and spiritual protection that had kept it concealed for millennia. As the 20th century dawned and the age of exploration gave way to the age of ideology, these mystical concepts would soon attract attention from quarters far removed from spiritual seeking. The idea that advanced civilizations might exist hidden from view would prove irresistible to those who believed that power, not enlightenment, was the ultimate prize to be won. The golden palaces of Shambhala would soon cast shadows that reached into the darkest corners of human ambition. If Shambhala represented the spiritual pinnacle of hidden realms, then Agartha promised something far more ambitious and, perhaps, more terrifying. A vast subterranean empire that dwarfed any kingdom the surface world had ever known. The concept emerged from the fertile imagination of Joseph-Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvedre, a French occultist whose 1886 work, Mission of Europe, introduced the Western world to a vision so grandiose that it seemed to rewrite the very foundations of human civilization. According to Saint-Yves, Agartha was not merely a hidden city or even a kingdom, but a global network of underground territories ruled by a supreme being known as the King of the World, a figure whose authority extended far beyond any earthly monarch and whose influence shaped the destiny of nations without their knowledge. Saint-Yves claimed his knowledge came through direct communication with an Eastern master who had initiated him into secrets preserved for millennia in the deepest archives of Tibetan monasteries. In his account, Agartha had once been accessible to surface humanity, serving as the source of all true wisdom and technological advancement. But as the centuries passed and the surface world descended into materialism and conflict, this underground civilization had gradually withdrawn, sealing its entrances and restricting contact to a chosen few who could serve as intermediaries between the two realms. The scale of Saint-Yves' vision was breathtaking. Agartha, he claimed, encompassed vast territories beneath multiple continents, connected by tunnels that stretched for thousands of miles through the Earth's crust. These weren't crude cave systems, but sophisticated transportation networks that allowed the underground civilization to move people and resources across distances that would take surface dwellers months to traverse. The King of the World, according to this elaborate mythology, governed not through conquest or coercion, but through an intricate understanding of cosmic laws that allowed him to influence events on the surface through what appeared to be natural causes. Earthquakes, floods, the rise and fall of empires, all were said to be orchestrated from the depths, according to a divine plan that surface humanity could neither comprehend nor resist. Libraries within Agartha supposedly contained the complete history of human civilization, including records of events that had not yet occurred, giving its rulers the ability to guide world affairs with the precision of chess masters moving pieces on a board whose full scope their opponents could never perceive. But it was Ferdinand Ossendowski who transformed Saint-Yves' esoteric vision into something that felt almost like investigative journalism. His 1922 book, Beasts, Men, and Gods, recounted his harrowing journey through Mongolia during the Russian Revolution, during which he claimed to have encountered lamas and tribal leaders who spoke of the underground kingdom as matter-of-factly as they discussed the weather. According to Ossendowski's sources, the King of the World had recently emerged from his subterranean realm to survey the chaos engulfing the surface, and his displeasure at what he witnessed had manifested in the unprecedented violence that was tearing apart nations and empires. The Mongolian shamans described a being of terrible wisdom and power who could read the thoughts of world leaders from his throne deep beneath the earth, who commanded legions of warriors that had never seen sunlight, and who possessed technologies that made the weapons of surface armies seem like children's toys. When Ossendowski's book reached Western audiences, it created a sensation that rippled through academic circles, occult societies, and even government intelligence agencies. Here was an account that seemed to bridge the gap between mystical speculation and eyewitness testimony, presented by a man whose credentials as a geologist and political scientist lent weight to claims that might otherwise have been dismissed as fantasy. The timing was perfect. In the aftermath of World War I, when old certainties had crumbled and the world seemed poised on the brink of even greater upheavals, the idea that hidden forces might be orchestrating global events from underground strongholds felt not just plausible, but almost inevitable. Yet even as these accounts captured imaginations, skeptical voices began to emerge. Critics pointed out the convenient vagueness of many details, the way that concrete claims about locations and entrances somehow always remained just out of reach of verification. Saint-Yves had died before he could lead any expeditions to prove his assertions, and Ossendowski's Mongolian sources seemed to vanish into the vast steppes whenever independent investigators tried to locate them. The supposed tunnels connecting continents would require engineering capabilities that surpassed anything demonstrated by known civilizations, and the geological evidence for vast hollow spaces beneath the Earth's crust remained frustratingly elusive. More troubling still was the way the Agartha narrative began to attract adherents whose interests seemed less spiritual than political. If there truly was a secret empire governing world affairs from hidden chambers, then perhaps it could be contacted, bargained with, or even conquered by those bold enough to seek it out. The concept of Agartha had evolved from mystical revelation to geopolitical obsession, and the implications were becoming increasingly dangerous. Secret societies across Europe began incorporating the underground empire into their ideologies, suggesting that contact with its rulers could provide the keys to reshaping the surface world according to their own visions of perfection. Maps were drawn showing theoretical entrance points, expeditions were planned to remote locations where ancient texts hinted at passages leading downward, and occult practitioners claimed to receive communications from Agarthan masters who promised power to those willing to serve their hidden agenda. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Agartha phenomenon was how it seemed to tap into something deeper than mere curiosity about underground realms. The idea of a secret empire pulling the strings of world events appealed to minds that struggled to accept that history might be driven by chaos, accident, and the collision of countless individual decisions rather than by some overarching intelligence. Agartha offered the comfort of conspiracy, the reassuring notion that someone somewhere was actually in control, even if that control was exercised from chambers so deep beneath the earth that their very existence remained forever in doubt. As the 1920s gave way to the 1930s, and as political movements across Europe began to embrace increasingly radical visions of human destiny, the legends of hidden kingdoms would attract attention from quarters that would transform mystical speculation into something far more sinister and immediate. A quest for power that would soon carry explorers to the world's most remote and dangerous places. The transformation of mystical seeking into political ambition reached its most disturbing culmination in the 1930s, when the legends of hidden kingdoms caught the attention of minds that viewed such knowledge not as spiritual enlightenment, but as the ultimate weapon. The Nazi regime, with its obsessive blend of occultism and racial ideology, became convinced that contact with underground civilizations could provide the keys to reshaping the world according to their twisted vision of destiny. What had begun as ethereal speculation about enlightened masters dwelling in hidden realms suddenly became militarized, funded by state resources, and pursued with the methodical efficiency that characterized the regime's most sinister projects. Heinrich Himmler, architect of the SS and keeper of the Reich's darkest secrets, established the Ahnenerbe, ostensibly a research organization dedicated to studying ancient Germanic heritage, but in reality, a sprawling network of expeditions, experiments, and investigation that pushed the boundaries between science and madness. Among their most ambitious undertakings were journeys to Tibet, officially described as anthropological missions, but rumored to be searches for the entrances to Shambhala and Agartha that occult texts had described for centuries. The expeditions, led by SS officers who had been carefully selected for their combination of academic credentials and ideological purity, carried equipment that seemed oddly sophisticated for simple cultural research. Radio gear capable of long-distance communication, surveying instruments designed for underground mapping, and devices whose purpose remained classified in documents that would not be declassified for decades. The official report spoke of measurements taken in remote monasteries, interviews with elderly lamas, and careful documentation of ancient texts and artifacts. But the whispered accounts that filtered back through intelligence networks painted a far more extraordinary picture. Local sources reported strange incidents, entire valleys where compasses spun wildly, mountainsides that seemed to emit faint humming sounds at certain times of day, and most unsettling of all, moments when expedition members claimed to have encountered figures in flowing robes who appeared suddenly on isolated mountain paths, delivered cryptic messages in perfect German, then vanished into terrain that offered no concealment. Whether these accounts reflected genuine mysteries, altitude-induced hallucinations, or deliberate disinformation designed to confuse enemy intelligence services, they contributed to a growing mythology that the Nazi expeditions had discovered something profound in the hidden valleys of Tibet. The most persistent rumors suggested that contact had been established, not with the enlightened masters that Buddhist tradition described, but with representatives of a far more ancient and morally ambiguous civilization that viewed the surface world's conflicts with detached interest. According to these accounts, agreements had been reached, technologies exchanged, and promises made that would fundamentally alter the balance of power once the war's outcome had been decided. The idea that Nazi Germany might be receiving assistance from underground allies provided a chilling explanation for the regime's seemingly impossible early successes and their confidence in ultimate victory despite increasingly desperate circumstances. As the war progressed and Germany's position became untenable, these rumors took on an even more sinister cast. Intelligence reports spoke of frantic activity in remote locations, of resources being diverted from the war effort to fund mysterious construction projects, and of high-ranking officials making cryptic references to insurance policies that would ensure the Reich's survival regardless of military outcomes. The most ambitious and mysterious of these alleged projects centered on Antarctica, that vast white continent where the absence of witnesses and the hostility of the environment made any secret activity virtually undetectable. Operation High Jump, launched by the United States Navy in 1946-47, was officially described as a training mission designed to test equipment and personnel under polar conditions. But the scale of the operation, over 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft, seemed disproportionate for a simple training exercise, especially in the immediate aftermath of a war that had left the military eager to reduce rather than expand its commitments. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, the expedition's leader and one of America's most celebrated polar explorers, had made his reputation through a series of daring flights over both the North and South Poles. His credentials were impeccable, his patriotism unquestioned, and his scientific achievements genuine, which made the persistent rumors surrounding Operation High Jump all the more troubling. According to these accounts, the expedition had encountered something unprecedented in the Antarctic ice, not the remnants of Nazi installations, as some intelligence reports suggested, but evidence of far older and more sophisticated habitation. And the most sensational claims centered on Byrd's alleged diary, a document that surfaced decades later describing a flight beyond the South Pole that led not to more ice, but to a green valley populated by beings who possessed technology that rendered conventional aircraft obsolete. The diary, written in Byrd's supposed first person, described encounters with tall, luminous-eyed figures who warned of humanity's destructive potential and spoke of their ancient civilization's role as guardians of planetary wisdom. Mainstream historians and document experts have since analyzed the alleged Byrd diary extensively, and the consensus is overwhelming. It is almost certainly a fabrication, created decades after the events it purports to describe, filled with anachronisms and inconsistencies that betray its modern origin. The language doesn't match Byrd's documented writing style. The technical details contradict known facts about the expedition, and most tellingly, no reference to such extraordinary encounters appears in any of Byrd's contemporaneous reports or personal correspondence. Yet the power of the story has proven remarkably resistant to debunking. In an age when trust in official narratives had been shattered by revelations of government secrecy and deception, the idea that extraordinary discoveries might be hidden from public view felt not just plausible, but inevitable. The fact that Operation High Jump ended abruptly, after only a few months, with several aircraft lost and official explanations that seemed oddly vague, provided fertile ground for speculation about what might really have been encountered in the Antarctic vastness. The dark expeditions of the 1930s and 1940s had transformed the gentle mysticism of Shambhala and Agartha into something far more troubling, a shadow mythology that suggested hidden powers might be manipulating world events from underground strongholds. Whether these stories reflected genuine discoveries, wartime propaganda, or simply the human tendency to find patterns in chaos, they had fundamentally altered how the modern world thought about the possibility of civilizations dwelling beneath our feet. But even as these militarized quests for underground empires captured headlines and fed conspiracy theories, older and gentler voices continued to whisper of different kinds of hidden peoples, beings whose relationship with humanity was not one of dominance or conflict, but of ancient guardianship and quiet compassion. Long before European explorers ever dreamed of hollow worlds or Nazi expeditions sought underground empires, the indigenous peoples of North America carried within their oral tradition stories that spoke of subterranean beings, with a tenderness and specificity that defied easy dismissal. These were not the grandiose tales of vast civilizations ruling from crystal palaces, but intimate accounts of rescue and survival that had been passed down through generations with the careful precision that sacred knowledge demands. Among the most compelling of these traditions are the stories told by the Hopi people of the American Southwest, whose oral histories describe not one but multiple encounters with beings they called the Ant People, underground dwellers who opened their homes to humanity during times when the surface world became uninhabitable. According to Hopi tradition, these interventions occurred during the destruction of previous worlds, cosmic cycles that ended in catastrophic fire or flood that made survival on the surface impossible. The Ant People, described as tall, thin beings with elongated heads and large, luminous eyes perfectly adapted to life in darkness, emerged from hidden entrances in the earth to guide survivors into elaborate tunnel systems that had been carved deep beneath the desert. These weren't crude cave shelters, but sophisticated underground cities, complete with food storage, water sources, and ventilation systems that allowed large populations to survive for years, while the surface world underwent transformation. The descriptions are remarkably consistent across different Hopi clans and villages, suggesting either a shared historical experience or a collective mythological framework so deeply embedded that it has resisted the distortions that typically accompany oral transmission over centuries. The Ant People are described not as gods or supernatural entities, but as neighbors, beings who possessed knowledge and technology that allowed them to thrive in environments where surface dwellers would perish, yet who felt sufficient kinship with humanity to offer aid during times of crisis. They taught survival skills, shared their food stores, and most remarkably, they did so without demanding worship, tribute, or permanent allegiance. When the surface world had healed and become habitable again, they guided the survivors back to the light and returned to their underground domains, asking only that their assistance be remembered and honored. The Hopi are not alone in preserving such memories. Across North America, indigenous traditions speak of similar encounters with subterranean peoples. The Cherokee tell of the moon-eyed people, pale beings with large eyes who lived in caves and emerged only at night because sunlight caused them pain. The Mandan tribe preserved stories of a time when their ancestors lived in an underground village until they were guided upward by spiritual beings who taught them to live on the surface. Even the Sioux carried accounts of people beneath, who occasionally rose to offer guidance during times of particular hardship. What makes these traditions particularly intriguing is their consistency across tribes that had little contact with one another, yet who independently developed remarkably similar descriptions of underground dwellers. The beings are almost universally described as taller and thinner than surface humans, with enlarged eyes adapted to darkness, pale skin that suggests generations spent away from sunlight, and a gentle demeanor that contrasts sharply with the fearsome underground entities described in European mythologies. Modern anthropologists and historians have struggled to categorize these accounts. Some interpret them as symbolic representations of humanity's relationship with the earth itself, metaphorical expressions of the life-giving properties of caves and underground water sources that sustained indigenous communities during droughts and harsh winters. Others suggest they may preserve cultural memories of actual historical events, encounters with other human groups who had adapted to subterranean living, perhaps survivors of ancient climatic catastrophes who developed specialized survival techniques that seemed miraculous to surface dwellers. The physical descriptions are particularly striking when examined through the lens of evolutionary adaptation. Large eyes, pale skin, and elongated limbs are precisely the characteristics one might expect to develop in populations that had spent generations in low-light environments. Cave-dwelling animals consistently show similar adaptations, and recent discoveries of human population that have lived in relative isolation for thousands of years demonstrate how quickly distinctive physical traits can emerge in response to environmental pressures. Yet the stories contain elements that push beyond what conventional anthropology can easily explain. The ant people are described as possessing technologies that seem to transcend what Stone Age cultures could have developed. Advanced ventilation systems, food preservation techniques, and construction methods that allowed them to create vast underground cities. Some accounts even suggest they had forms of artificial lighting that didn't depend on fire, creating illumination that allowed normal activities to continue in the depths of the earth. Perhaps most intriguingly, many of these traditions include detailed descriptions of the underground territories themselves, elaborate tunnel networks that connected multiple chambers, some natural and others clearly artificial, stretching for miles beneath the desert landscape. Archaeological evidence from the American Southwest adds another layer of complexity to these accounts. The region is riddled with natural cave systems, many of which show clear signs of human habitation stretching back thousands of years. Mesa Verde, Canyon de Chelly, and countless other sites demonstrate that cliff-dwelling and cave-based communities were not just possible, but common throughout the prehistoric period. More remarkably, some of these sites show evidence of sophisticated engineering, ventilation shafts, water management systems, and structural modification that suggest a level of underground construction expertise that rivals the descriptions found in indigenous oral traditions. The question that haunts researchers is whether these stories represent cultural memories of actual encounters with specialized cave-dwelling peoples, whose way of life was so dramatically different from surface communities that they seemed almost like a separate species. Could groups of humans have developed such complete adaptation to subterranean environments that they became the ant people of Hopi memory, emerging during catastrophes to assist their surface cousins before retreating back into depths that remained hidden and protected? The possibility challenges conventional assumptions about how human societies develop and interact. If such encounters occurred, they suggest a more complex picture of prehistoric North America than most historians have imagined, one in which multiple human populations pursued radically different survival strategies, with some choosing the security and stability of underground life over the uncertainties of surface existence. As we consider these ancient testimonies alongside the accumulated evidence of vast cave systems and sophisticated underground architecture, the boundary between myth and memory begins to blur, leading us toward discoveries that suggest the Earth itself may hold more secrets than any tradition has dared to imagine. If the stories of ancient peoples suggested that vast spaces existed beneath the Earth's surface, modern science has begun to reveal that the reality may be even more extraordinary than any legend dared imagine. In 2014, geophysicists announced one of the most startling discoveries in the history of planetary science: evidence of enormous reservoirs of water locked within the crystalline structure of minerals deep in the Earth's mantle, perhaps containing 3 times more water than all the surface oceans combined. This wasn't liquid water flowing through vast caverns as ancient cosmologies had envisioned, but H2O molecules chemically bound within ringwoodite crystals hundreds of miles beneath our feet, suggesting that our planet's interior is far more dynamic and water-rich than anyone had previously suspected. The implications staggered researchers who had spent their careers studying what they believed was a relatively dry and predictable planetary interior. If such massive quantities of water existed at depths previously thought to be bone-dry, what other assumptions about the Earth's hidden architecture might need to be reconsidered? The discovery didn't prove the existence of vast underground seas, but it demonstrated that the boundary between scientific fact and mythological imagination was far more porous than skeptics had insisted. More direct evidence of hidden aquatic worlds began emerging from cave explorers who pushed deeper into the Earth's crust than previous generations had ever imagined possible. Dragon's Breath Cave in Namibia revealed what appeared to be the world's largest underground lake, its dark waters extending far beyond the reach of the most powerful underwater lighting systems. Divers who attempted to map its full extent reported an eerie sense of vastness, as if they were swimming not in a cave but in an underground ocean whose shores remained forever out of sight. Even more remarkable were the ecosystems that scientists discovered thriving in these hidden aquatic environments. Muvel Cave in Romania, sealed off from the surface world for over 5 million years, contained an entire biological community that had evolved in complete isolation. The creatures dwelling in its toxic, oxygen-poor waters included species of spiders, scorpions, and leeches that existed nowhere else on Earth, sustained not by photosynthesis but by chemosynthesis, the process of deriving energy from chemical reactions in the absence of sunlight. Here was proof that complex life could not only survive but flourish in environments that would kill surface dwellers within minutes. The discovery challenged fundamental assumptions about the limits of life itself. If such elaborate ecosystems could develop and persist in sealed underground chambers fed by nothing more than sulfur compounds and methane seeping through rock, then the possibility of even more sophisticated subterranean life forms seemed to shift from science fiction to scientific plausibility. These weren't the radiant cities described in ancient texts, but they were undeniably alien worlds thriving beneath our feet, complete with their own food chains, evolutionary pressures, and survival strategies that had developed independently of everything happening on the surface. The most visually stunning of these underground discoveries occurred in 2000, when miners working deep beneath the Chihuahuan Desert in Mexico broke through into what appeared to be a natural cathedral carved from crystal. The Cave of Crystals, or Cueva de los Cristales, contained selenite formations so massive they dwarfed human visitors, some stretching over 30 feet in length and weighing several tons. The crystals had grown in superheated water over hundreds of thousands of years, creating an environment so beautiful and otherworldly that photographs seemed like artistic renderings rather than documentary evidence. Walking through the Cave of Crystals felt like entering the architecture of giants, or perhaps the fossilized remains of a civilization that had built with light itself. The formations were so large and geometrically perfect that they seemed artificial, as if some ancient intelligence had designed them as monuments or temples. The heat and humidity made extended exploration nearly impossible for humans, but the brief glimpses that researchers managed to capture revealed chambers that stretched far beyond the reach of their lights, suggesting that the visible crystals might represent only a small fraction of a much larger underground complex. Similar discoveries began emerging from cave systems around the world, each revealing environments that seemed to belong more to alien planets than to the familiar Earth of surface experience. Son Doong Cave in Vietnam was found to contain passages so vast that they housed their own weather systems, with clouds forming and dissipating within chambers that could accommodate entire city blocks. Underground rivers flowed through these spaces, carving new passages and feeding ecosystems that included plants growing in the faint light that filtered down from openings hundreds of feet above. The scale of these discoveries forced scientists to reconsider their estimates of how much habitable space might exist within the Earth's crust. If individual cave systems could contain multiple climate zones, support complex ecosystems, and stretch for hundreds of miles through underground networks, then the total volume of potentially inhabitable subterranean space might be enormous. Lava tubes in Hawaii and Iceland extended for miles underground, creating natural highways that connected distant regions through passages that had never seen sunlight but remained stable and accessible for thousands of years. These geological marvels raised profound questions about what else might be hidden in the vast network of caves, caverns, and underground waterways that honeycomb the Earth's crust. If nature could create crystal cathedrals and underground weather systems, if life could evolve in complete isolation from the surface world, if massive bodies of water could exist at depths where no human had ever ventured, then perhaps the ancient stories of hidden civilizations deserved more serious consideration than modern skepticism had allowed. The boundary between the possible and the impossible seemed to shift with each new discovery. Cave systems that had been dismissed as local curiosities were revealed to be parts of vast underground networks. Bodies of water that had been assumed to be small pools turned out to be lakes, whose far shores had never been mapped. And most remarkably, life forms that had been presumed extinct or impossible were found thriving in conditions that challenged every assumption about the requirements for complex biological systems. Yet these scientific revelations, extraordinary as they were, represented only the exploration of the uppermost layers of the Earth's hidden architecture. The deepest human penetration into the planet's crust, the Soviet Union's Kola super-deep borehole, had reached barely 12 kilometers down, a distance that represented less than 0.2% of the journey to the Earth's center. If such wonders existed in the shallow depths that humans could barely reach, what might await discovery in the vast unexplored territories that stretched thousands of kilometers deeper into the planet's interior? The answer to that question would soon emerge not from the natural formations that geology had created over millions of years, but from the deliberate constructions that human hands had carved into the living rock. Underground cities whose scale and sophistication would force even the most skeptical minds to reconsider what might be possible in the hidden depths. While legends spoke of mythical realms and scientists probed the theoretical limits of subterranean life, archaeologists working in the volcanic landscape of central Turkey began uncovering evidence that would bridge the gap between imagination and documented reality. Beneath the otherworldly terrain of Cappadocia, where centuries of wind and water had carved the soft volcanic rock into fairy chimneys and honeycomb cliffs, lay discoveries that would redefine what historians thought possible about large-scale underground habitation. The city of Derinkuyu, when fully excavated, revealed itself to be not merely a collection of caves or storage chambers, but a sophisticated underground metropolis capable of sheltering up to 20,000 people across multiple levels that descended more than 200 feet into the earth. Walking through Derinkuyu today feels like entering a world that exists parallel to our own, complete with all the infrastructure necessary for sustained civilization. The city contains churches with carved altars and religious frescoes, schools with stone benches arranged for instruction, communal kitchens with elaborate ventilation systems that carried smoke to the surface through hidden chimneys, and even stables large enough to house hundreds of animals. Wine cellars, grain storage facilities, and water management systems demonstrate a level of planning and engineering that rivals anything achieved by surface cities of the same period. What makes Derinkuyu even more remarkable is that it represents only one node in a vast network of interconnected underground cities that stretch across the Cappadocian Plateau. Archaeological surveys have identified over 200 subterranean settlements in the region, many connected by tunnels that allowed people to travel for miles underground without ever emerging into daylight. Some historians estimate that during times of conflict or persecution, the combined underground cities of Cappadocia could have housed over 100,000 people, creating a shadow civilization that could vanish from the surface world at a moment's notice. The scale challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient urban planning and suggests that our ancestors possessed capabilities for large-scale underground construction that modern societies have never attempted to match. The engineering sophistication becomes even more apparent when examining the ventilation systems that made such massive underground populations possible. Derinkuyu's air shafts, some extending the full depth of the city, were designed with such precision that fresh air circulated naturally throughout the complex, while cooking smoke and other waste gases were efficiently removed. The system worked so effectively that archaeologists found evidence of continuous habitation spanning several centuries, with some levels remaining occupied even during periods when the upper levels were abandoned. But Cappadocia was not unique. Thousands of miles away, on the Mediterranean island of Malta, archaeologists have studied the Hypogeum of Halsaflieni, an underground temple complex that predates Stonehenge by nearly 1,000 years. Carved from solid limestone around 4000 BCE, the Hypogeum consists of 3 levels of chambers, halls, and passageways that demonstrate a level of acoustic engineering that modern architects struggle to replicate. Sounds whispered in certain chambers can be heard clearly throughout the complex, while other spaces seem to absorb sound completely, creating zones of profound silence within the underground labyrinth. The Hypogeum's builders understood properties of sound and space that suggest either remarkable empirical experimentation or inherited knowledge from even older traditions of underground construction. The chambers of the Hypogeum were clearly designed for specific acoustic effects, with some rooms amplifying human voices to create an almost supernatural resonance, while others were shaped to produce perfect silence. Recent studies using modern acoustic equipment have revealed that certain chambers seem to resonate at frequencies that match the human vocal range, suggesting they may have been designed to enhance chanting, singing, or other forms of ritualized sound. The precision of the carving rivals anything achieved by later civilizations with metal tools, yet the Hypogeum was created during the Neolithic period using only stone implements. The smooth curves of the walls, the perfect symmetry of the chambers, and the integration of natural rock formations with artificial construction suggest a level of planning and execution that required not just individual skill, but coordinated effort by communities that possessed sophisticated knowledge of engineering, acoustics, and underground construction techniques. These discoveries in Malta and Turkey represent only the most famous examples of ancient underground cities, but similar constructions have been found across the globe. In China, underground cities carved into low-S cliffs have housed populations for over a millennium. In Jordan, the ancient city of Petra consists largely of structures carved directly into rock faces, with many chambers extending deep into the mountains. Even in Peru, the Inca built extensive tunnel systems beneath their mountain cities, some of which remain unexplored to this day. The global distribution of sophisticated underground architecture suggests that the knowledge and motivation for subterranean construction was far more widespread in ancient times than modern historians have generally recognized. These weren't desperate emergency shelters carved by refugees fleeing temporary disasters, but permanent cities built by societies that had chosen to make underground living a central part of their cultural and survival strategy. The implications of these real underground cities extend far beyond their archaeological significance. They demonstrate that large-scale subterranean living was not only possible with ancient technology, but was actually achieved by multiple civilizations across different continents and time periods. The sophisticated engineering, the evidence of long-term habitation, and the sheer scale of construction suggest that our ancestors possessed both the knowledge and the motivation to create entire societies that could exist independently of the surface world. Perhaps most intriguingly, many of these underground cities show evidence of connections to even larger networks of tunnels and chambers that remain unexplored. Ground-penetrating radar and other modern sensing technologies have detected vast, hollow spaces beneath known archaeological sites, suggesting that what has been excavated may represent only a small fraction of what actually exists below ground. In some cases, exploration has been limited by safety concerns, unstable geology, or simply the enormous cost and complexity of mapping networks that may extend for hundreds of miles through solid rock. These discoveries transform the entire conversation about hidden civilizations. They provide concrete proof that substantial underground societies have existed throughout human history, that the technology and knowledge for their construction was possessed by our ancestors, and that the motivations for choosing subterranean life were compelling enough to justify the enormous effort such cities required. The legends of Agartha and Shambhala, the stories of the ant people, and even the wild theories of hollow earth enthusiasts suddenly seem less like fantasy and more like cultural memories of achievements that archaeology is only beginning to document. As researchers continue to map these ancient networks and discover new underground complexes, they are also beginning to detect something else in the deep places of the Earth. Subtle vibrations and acoustic phenomena that suggest the planet's hidden architecture may be far more active and dynamic than anyone has imagined. The Earth breathes, and sometimes that breath becomes a shudder that reminds us how little we truly understand about the forces moving beneath our feet. Throughout recorded history, seismic events have punctuated human experience with moments of raw planetary power that seem to transcend the neat explanations that modern geology provides. While most earthquakes follow predictable patterns along well-mapped fault lines, there are tremors, vibrations, and acoustic phenomena that resist easy categorization, creating mysteries that have led some researchers to wonder whether the planet's hidden architecture might be more dynamic and more populated than conventional science has dared to imagine. The winter of 1811 to 1812 brought to the American frontier one of the most extraordinary seismic events in recorded North American history. The New Madrid earthquakes, centered in what is now Missouri, were so powerful that they rang church bells in Boston over 1,000 miles away, cracked sidewalks in Washington, D.C., and most remarkably, caused the Mississippi River to flow backward for several hours as the Earth's convulsions temporarily reversed the gradient of the riverbed. Eyewitnesses described phenomena that seemed to belong more to apocalyptic literature than to geological reality. Fountains of sand and water shooting from the ground as if the earth were bleeding, mysterious lights dancing across the sky, and deep rumbling sounds that seemed to emanate not from any single source, but from the planet itself. Modern seismologists explain these effects as consequences of the unique geology of the Mississippi Valley, where thick layers of sediment can amplify and prolong seismic waves in ways that create seemingly impossible phenomena. Yet the accounts from survivors contain details that continue to puzzle researchers. The witnesses spoke of sounds that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself, not the sharp crack of breaking rock or the rumble of shifting plates, but something more rhythmic and purposeful, almost like machinery operating far below the surface. Some described hearing what sounded like massive doors opening and closing in the depths, while others reported low-frequency humming that seemed to vibrate through their bones rather than their ears. The phenomena persisted for months after the main shocks had ended, leading to speculation that the earthquakes had somehow awakened or activated something that had long lain dormant beneath the Mississippi Valley. Similar mysteries have emerged from seismic monitoring stations around the world. In 1997, global seismograph networks detected what became known as the hum, a persistent low-frequency vibration that emanated from deep within the Earth and continued for several days. Unlike typical earthquake signatures, this phenomenon showed no clear epicenter and no obvious connection to known geological processes. Scientists eventually attributed it to ocean waves interacting with seafloor topography in unusual ways, but the explanation satisfied few who had actually analyzed the data. The signal had characteristics that seemed almost artificial, too regular, too sustained, and too widespread to fit comfortably within conventional models of natural seismic activity. Even more puzzling are the mystery booms that have been reported with increasing frequency across multiple continents. These acoustic phenomena consist of loud, explosive sounds that shake buildings and rattle windows, but leave no seismic signature that monitoring equipment can detect. The booms occur in areas with no military activity, no mining operations, and no obvious geological instability, yet witnesses describe sounds powerful enough to trigger car alarms and send animals fleeing in apparent terror. The phenomenon has been reported from rural areas of the American Midwest to remote regions of Australia, from the forests of Canada to the mountains of Italy, suggesting a global pattern that transcends local geological conditions. Some researchers have proposed that these sounds might be caused by atmospheric phenomena, meteors burning up in the upper atmosphere, military aircraft flying at supersonic speeds, or even solar radiation interacting with the Earth's magnetic field in ways that create acoustic effects. Yet none of these explanations adequately account for the ground-shaking intensity of the sounds or their apparent ability to occur in areas where no atmospheric disturbances have been detected. Perhaps the most intriguing seismic mystery of recent years occurred in November 2018, when monitoring stations around the globe detected a seismic wave unlike anything in the geological record. The signal began near the island of Mayotte in the Indian Ocean and proceeded to circle the entire planet for over 20 minutes, creating a pattern that resembled a perfectly regular heartbeat emanating from deep within the Earth's crust. No human being felt the vibrations, which occurred at frequencies below the threshold of human perception. But sensitive instruments recorded the phenomenon with crystal clarity, as it propagated through solid rock at speeds that suggested it was traveling through the planet's deepest layers. The scientific explanation that eventually emerged involved the collapse of an underwater volcanic chamber, creating a resonance effect that transmitted through the Earth's internal structure like sound through a vast musical instrument. Yet the mathematical precision of the wave pattern, its extraordinary duration, and its global reach left many researchers wondering whether natural processes alone could account for such a remarkably organized phenomenon. These deep tremors and unexplained acoustic phenomena raise profound questions about the nature of the Earth's interior and the possibility that conventional geology may be missing crucial aspects of planetary dynamics. If the planet can generate signals that propagate globally with clockwork precision, if mysterious sounds can emanate from depths where no known processes should produce such effects, and if seismic events can create phenomena that seem to transcend the boundaries between the geological and the artificial, then perhaps the theories about hidden civilizations deserve more serious consideration than mainstream science has been willing to provide. The possibility that organized activity might be occurring in the deep places of the Earth gains credibility when considered alongside the archaeological evidence of vast underground cities, the biological proof that complex ecosystems can thrive in subterranean environments, and the geological discoveries of water reserves and livable spaces at depths previously thought to be sterile and uninhabitable. If human civilizations could create underground cities capable of housing tens of thousands of people using only ancient technology, what might be possible for societies that had millennia to develop specialized knowledge of subterranean engineering and survival? The seismic mysteries that continue to puzzle researchers may represent the faintest echoes of activities occurring at depths where no surface instrument can penetrate directly. Whether these signals indicate natural processes that science has yet to understand or something more extraordinary, they serve as constant reminders that the Earth beneath our feet remains largely unexplored territory, full of spaces vast enough to contain secrets that could reshape our understanding of life itself. As we approach the deepest questions raised by centuries of exploration, mythology, and scientific discovery, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of mysteries that may never be fully resolved, yet whose very existence transforms how we think about our planet and our place upon it. As our journey through the hidden depths draws toward its quiet conclusion, we find ourselves standing at the convergence of everything we have explored. Ancient myths that speak with startling consistency across cultures, scientific discoveries that reveal wonders beyond imagination, archaeological evidence of sophisticated underground civilizations, and seismic mysteries that hint at activities occurring in realms no surface dweller has ever reached. The question that emerges from this convergence is both simple and profound. In a universe where the impossible has repeatedly become the documented fact, where the mythological has so often proven to contain kernels of literal truth, what should we make of the persistent whispers that somewhere beneath our feet, hidden in chambers carved from living rock, there exists a civilization that has chosen the deep places of the Earth as its eternal home? The scientific foundation for such a possibility has grown stronger with each passing year. In 2018, researchers announced the discovery of what they termed deep life, vast communities of microorganisms living at depths of up to 5 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface, thriving in conditions of crushing pressure, extreme heat, and total darkness that would instantly kill any surface-dwelling creature. These microbial ecosystems may constitute the majority of all life on Earth, representing a biosphere that exists entirely independent of sunlight, photosynthesis, and all the processes that we had assumed were necessary for biological systems to develop and persist. The organisms of the deep biosphere feed on chemical reactions involving sulfur, methane, and radioactive elements, creating energy through processes that seem almost alchemical in their transformation of the planet's most basic materials into the complex chemistry of life. If microscopic life can flourish in such extreme environments, establishing complex ecosystems that have remained stable for millions of years, then the leap to more sophisticated organisms becomes less a matter of impossibility and more a question of evolutionary timescales and adaptive pressures. Cave-dwelling animals consistently develop enlarged eyes, enhanced hearing, and pale coloration as they adapt to lightless environments. Human populations, isolated in specific environments for even relatively short periods, show measurable physical adaptations. What might occur over thousands of generations in communities that had deliberately chosen to make the deep earth their permanent home. The archaeological record provides compelling evidence that such choices were not only possible, but actually made by substantial human populations. The underground cities of Cappadocia, the temple complexes of Malta, and similar constructions found across the globe demonstrate that our ancestors possessed both the knowledge and the motivation to create elaborate subterranean societies. These weren't temporary refugees, but permanent cities, complete with all the infrastructure necessary for sustained civilization. If ancient peoples could achieve such feats with primitive tools, what might be possible for societies that had millennia to perfect the arts of underground construction, environmental control, and resource management? The persistent myths and legends take on new significance when viewed through this lens of demonstrated possibility. The detailed accounts of underground realms found in every major cultural tradition may preserve not just symbolic truths about the human psyche, but actual memories of encounters with peoples who had chosen a fundamentally different path of development. The luminous-eyed beings described by the Hopi, the serpent kings of Hindu tradition, the wise masters of Tibetan Buddhism, could these represent cultural memories of actual contact with human societies that had become so thoroughly adapted to subterranean life that they seemed like a different species to surface dwellers? The scientific discoveries of hidden water reservoirs, vast cave systems, and underground ecosystems provide the environmental foundation that could support such civilizations. The deep biosphere proves that life can exist independently of surface conditions, while discoveries like the Cave of Crystals demonstrate that the Earth's interior contains spaces of cathedral-like grandeur that seem almost designed for habitation. Underground rivers, geothermal energy sources, and mineral deposits could provide everything necessary for technological development along paths entirely different from those pursued by surface civilizations. Yet the most intriguing evidence may come from the phenomena that conventional science struggles to explain, the mysterious seismic signals that propagate globally with artificial precision, the unexplained acoustic events that seem to emanate from deep within the Earth, the persistent reports of activities and encounters that don't fit within accepted frameworks of what should be possible in the planet's interior. These anomalies might represent nothing more than natural processes that science has yet to understand, but they could also be the faintest traces of activities occurring at depths where no surface instrument can penetrate directly. The question ultimately becomes not whether such civilizations could exist, but whether we possess the humility to acknowledge how much of our own planet remains unknown to us. Less than 1% of the Earth's interior has been directly examined by human beings. The deepest hole ever drilled extends barely 12 kilometers into a planet whose radius measures over 6,000 kilometers. Our knowledge of what lies beneath is based largely on indirect measurements and theoretical models, leaving vast territories unmapped and unexplored. In the end, we return to where we began. In the darkness that has always invited imagination, in the silence that seems to hold secrets, in the depths that call to something ancient in human consciousness. The convergence of science and mythology, of documented fact and persistent legend, creates a space where certainty dissolves and wonder takes its place. We have seen that the Earth contains hidden oceans, that life thrives in impossible conditions, that our ancestors built cities in the depths, and that the planet generates signals whose meaning remains opaque to our most sophisticated instruments. Whether civilizations exist in the deep places of the Earth may be less important than what the question itself reveals about the boundaries of human knowledge and the persistence of human hope. In a cosmos where the majority of matter remains invisible, where the majority of life on our own planet has only recently been discovered, where the majority of our own world's interior remains as mysterious as distant galaxies, the possibility that we share this planet with hidden neighbors seems not just plausible, but almost inevitable. The answer to our deepest questions may lie not in the accumulation of more evidence or the development of better instruments, but in the recognition that mystery itself is a fundamental aspect of existence. The legends of underground realms persist not because they can be proven or disproven, but because they speak to something essential in the human experience. The knowledge that beneath the surface of the familiar lies the infinite unknown, patient and eternal, waiting for those brave enough to descend into its depths. In the quiet spaces beneath the earth, in the darkness that holds more than absence of light, the final question dissolves into something larger than answers. There, in the silence that speaks without words, we find not solutions, but the deeper mystery of what it means to dwell on a planet whose secrets may be as infinite as the cosmos that contains it. And now, as our exploration of the hidden depths comes to its peaceful end, let the weight of these mysteries settle gently around you like a soft blanket of earth and stone. The questions we've raised tonight, about civilizations dwelling in crystal chambers, about ancient peoples who found sanctuary in the depths, about the vast unknown territories that stretch beneath our sleeping world. These questions need no urgent answers. They are companions for the quiet hours, gentle puzzles that can rest beside you as your breathing deepens and your thoughts begin to drift. Feel yourself sinking slowly, like a gentle descent through layers of warm, soft earth, past the familiar surface world, past the reach of ordinary concerns, down into spaces where time moves differently and rest comes naturally. The underground rivers flow steadily in their hidden courses. The crystal caves hold their silent vigil, and somewhere in the deep places of the world, mysteries wait patiently for another day of wondering. Let your mind settle into the rhythm of the earth itself, the slow, steady pulse that has continued for billions of years, the quiet breathing of a planet that holds so many secrets in its gentle embrace. There is no need to solve the puzzles tonight, no urgency to find the answers. Simply rest in the knowledge that the world contains more wonders than we can imagine, and that in sleep, we join the vast community of dreamers who have always sensed that beneath the familiar lies the infinite. Good night, fellow explorers of the depths. May your dreams carry you safely through hidden passages, and may you wake refreshed from your journey into the peaceful darkness below.